Hello folks. Okay, I've had a hell of a lot of emails from people over the last couple of months who have followed the advice I was giving in relation to trying to get a hold of your entry of birth. Interesting, some of the emails. A lot of people are getting run around by the registrars saying that they've never heard of it, which is fraud. Okay, so you want to look at fraud, section 3 and 2. There, because you can have them for that as individuals. So when you do ring these people up and they're talking to you, you need to get the name for reference, okay, for a reference that you actually made the call. And even better, as I do, is you record any calls when you're dealing with anything civil system. You want to record the call. It's important that you do that, because then you've got a reference, and if you're going to use your recording, then you want to transcribe it. Transcribe it is better, because then you can use what was in the call in written format. And of course, you've always got the recorded file to evidence it, if anybody wants to pretend that it didn't happen. So those are very important points that I would suggest you start to consider. Older people are getting their entry of birth, and unfortunately it's got a surname on it. Again, as I said before, it does depend on how your parents filled it out as to what you're actually going to get back. And then I've also noted some people have got their entry birth back and their Christian name is uppercase. Okay, so that seems to be the game going on at the moment, especially in relation to the registrars claiming that they haven't got a clue what an entry of birth is. So fraud, section 2 and 3, that's what you want to get savvy with. So it's the Fraud Act 2006, and it's only a short bit, but if you get that into your mind, then you can start to understand your remedy or recourse for anybody in the civil system that's telling lies. And it's the same with the police. The police are the same, and they're committing fraud if they're lying or hiding, okay? Because basically there's a contract in relation to the police and the public, and that contract is that they will not tell lies, they will understand the law, and if you request a warrant card, they better show it to show that they hold the office of constable, because it's the warrant card that is the authority of the office of constable, and that's signed off by the chief constable. So if they're refusing to give the warrant card, then you need to get onto the chief constable and demand to know why he's either not signed a warrant card for that particular police constable, or his constables are acting contrary to the rules of the game, as it were. Now, so let's get into these live birth and birth certificate, because I think it's probably been missed on the video, if you've watched it, where I presented my own entry of birth for you to see. I did say very plain that the entry of birth is still person. It doesn't define you as man, doesn't the entry of birth. You're still on person. But the entry of birth, having only your Christian name, puts you in the private. The birth certificate with the surname puts you in the public. Okay, that's very important that you understand that grammar. It's really important. So in essence then, both the entry of birth and the birth certificate are two sides of the same coin, though they do operate as in different jurisdictions, private, public. Okay, so that needs to be understood also. Now, that said, both titles are entities. Okay, they are a entity. They're not a flesh and blood living man or woman, or man, male, female. You've gone off man and you are in person. You're into corporation. Okay. Now, births and deaths, again, is very important. Relates only to the birth of a corporation and the death of a corporation. So regardless of what is going on, you are dealing with the birth and of a corporation. And then, of course, when the corporation, just like you're running a business, You'll start a business, that's its birth, and if you fold it, that's its death. Yeah, so if you can understand it in that way, you can understand then that all these certificates are certificates of the birth of an entity, a straw man. You know, let's not panic about this, because I have also said in previous videos that it's not the end of the world if you cannot achieve your entry of birth. Nor is it the end of the world if you are operating on the birth certificate. Because what's actually gone on there is a mistake has been made by you because you didn't understand these concepts. Now, there is a method to right this mistake, okay? And that's what I want to discuss in this video today. Okay, so first we'll look at Bouvier's online dictionary, from which we get the term uberrima fides. That's Latin for perfect good faith or abundant good faith. Now, this is in relation to contracts and agreements, okay? Because when you register your offspring, you are entering into a contract with the private state, okay? So it's in the private. The birth certificate, of course, puts you in the public. It says this phrase is used to express that a contract must be made in perfect good faith, concealing nothing, okay? So basically it's saying if a contract is to be upheld, there has to be no concealment of anything within that contract between both parties, okay? And it uses the example, as in the case of insurance, the insured must observe the most perfect good faith towards the insurer. So that's uberrima fides. So that's in relation to a contract must not conceal anything from either party. Okay, so that's disclosure again, where everything has to be disclosed in full, or it's void as a contract or agreement. Okay, that's another term we can use for contract. The situation we have in relation to the concealment of all the facts in relation to the private state when you register your offspring can be classed as state capture, okay? And it's also can be called a private placement adoption. So the state is basically adopting your offspring, yeah? And that, in and of itself, isn't given forth when you are registering. At no point do they explain this to you. So that's concealment. It's concealment of the facts in relation to the agreement you think you're taking on and the actual agreement, okay? So there's concealment going on there right away. And that's being done by the state against you. And also they're telling you that you have to do this. And they say by law. Well, if you don't register your child, you are not in a contract. And so there is no administration law that would force you to comply with that contract. So, for instance, the obligations that are set against that person, i.e. following government statutes, following government acts, they're non-binding and void because you haven't been given all the facts. The facts have not been put forward. Do you understand what I'm saying there? And also, in contracts and agreements, no party can have the upper hand in that agreement, that all the rules involved in any agreement or contract are binding on all parties in that contract. It has to be that way. If it is not, again, it's void. Yeah, it's a void contract. Are we getting this? And we've discussed that in one of the previous videos in relation to a restrictive covenant. Again, void. You know, the idea that the government can stop you trading, even if you've took the loans, is a constrictive covenant. And thus it voids any agreements that you might have entered into with the government, with the council, or whomever is issuing out these loans. Okay, so when I got arrested, because the police were enforcing the COVID regulation, the COVID Act, and they were very plain about that, and then the council officer, Louise Hilton, came along enforcing the COVID Act. It's just not allowed. It's not in any, it's not there. Now, they can't even claim it upon you to stop your trading because it's a restrictive covenant. You know, you needed to go for those loans because all of a sudden they pulled off trade, stopped everybody from trading except the chosen ones. Yeah, you have to start seeing these chosen ones as they are, collaborators. Are you with me? This is what we're collaborating with, because what we're facing here is the same format that history has shown us to be called Nazism. It's exactly the same. It's no different at all. It's just being brought in a different manner, but it's the same principle. So you are collaborating. If you are one of the chosen, even if you're the big boys, or even if you're one of those shops that are still allowed to operate. For instance, there's a particular shoe shop in our town, whom, for some strange reason, is allowed to have people book online through her accomplice's secondary network. She's allowed to then advertise on this new platform that's been set up and then invite people into the shop to purchase. Now that's a bit of skullduggery, is it not? That's a bit of slyness going on. And of course, if you were to do that and you're not in with the council, you're going to have them round at your shop, like Alistair had them round at his shop on the 31st of December when we witnessed the police threatening, and would have carried it out had I not turned up as witness to actually breaking and entering into a private property. Okay, so why is this not happening to this particular shoe shop in the town? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they're operating with the council. They are collaborating with the council. Okay, and this is why this woman can advertise her shop and then bring you in on an appointment to purchase. So you're still going in the shop, okay? So can you see how this game is playing out? Now, I've used that example because it's the same with the supermarkets, it's the same with McDonald's, it's the same with KFC, it's the same with all these big corporations that are allowed to do what you were not allowed to do as a small business owner in Accrington Town Centre. Yeah, because it's collaboration. There's a collaboration going on. Now, with McDonald's, what we can see clearly is they're trying to move everything online. And this then has the effect of building up this Uber company. Yeah, because they're doing the deliveries. So if you are getting a delivery from McDonald's, you're actually putting money into this twisted group called Uber. Okay, it's not a good bunch. You know, there's some pretty strange minds operating as Uber drivers. That's all I'll say to you. And I'm taking that from recent experience I've just had with them. Okay, parking up. They thought they owned the whole place. Okay, so that's another point you need to take into consideration in relation to how the chosen, the collaborators, are also helping to move this new system in that they're trying to create. And as I said, with the shoe shop, she is moving it online. So again, she's playing into the game with the council, which is to shift all trade online. Yeah. So the council then are admitting openly that their plan has always been, as I exposed many years ago, throughout the time I've been at the Chamber of Trade, to stop your trading. Okay, that is their full intent, and they're using the rate system, rent system, to actually prevent people from actually opening up a business in the high street as a shop or as a cafe. Yeah, because let's look at it another way. There are certain cafes that are not allowed to open and some that are. Are you seeing what I'm saying? And the decider is collaboration. So you need to start looking at these collaborators as they are and not as they're trying to portray with jolly old smiles And this idea that, oh, look, we're fantastic and lovely. No, they're collaborating with the fascist state, and that needs to be addressed and fully understood. Now, I've gone a little bit off track there, but it is an example that needs to be just put in there so you can have a look at your own towns and see this very mechanic in action. Because this is how it's working, and this is how they're dividing up society, along with the shot for the passports. It's all about pretending to be operating according to law when in fact they're doing the complete opposite, and especially in breach of common law. Everything that this COVID game is doing is in breach of common law, the common law and English common law. So that again, you need to start to recognise these facts as they play out today, because this is how we can stop it. Once you start to understand the situation fully, you can see the players who are happy to go along with this while pretending that they're just like you, the average guy on the street. They're not, okay? And this has been going on for a long time. I've noted this in the chamber. There are certain players who have been moving for the council against everything and anything that we could class as trade, private enterprise. And the Chamber of Trade has been the key method of how they've tried to manipulate this, sideline the Chamber of Trade, because as I've said, when the council come up with new ideas, they have to give it public consultation. Now, the Chamber of Trade is that public consultation, and you don't know this. So the members of the Chamber of Trade are very important, because unbeknown to you, they're actually operating on your behalf, because they're giving the green light or nay to the council as though it's the public that have actually okayed what it is they're doing, when in fact it isn't. It's just local traders, some of which are already operating with the council and know the script that they're playing out in accordance with that. So, yeah, the Chamber of Trade is being sidelined because it's very important. It's the council's means of claiming it's given public consultation to all the nonsense ideas that have been going on here for a long time, people, okay? So keep that in mind, and we'll just get back now to the titles and the actual contracts and agreements that are made when you register your offspring. Okay, so now we go back to this. It's called mutuality of contract, and this is from the lawdictionary.org. Okay, and it says the requirement that all rules must apply to all parties to a contract for the contract to be enforceable. Okay, so any rules in any contract or agreement that people make, whether it's with each other or especially with the state, saying the contract with the police in how they're supposed to behave, the rules of the game in those contracts are applicable to all parties involved. So that means you as public, it means you as a private trader, etc. There are no contracts that are enforceable if they are one-sided, if the rules are applying better to one side than they are to the other, which is clearly what's going on now today. Okay, with the COVID contract, because as I got arrested, so let's give this an example. There was a contract they said the government put out there that they have with the public, the general public, that, oh, we all have to stop this because of the pandemic, okay? So, that being the case, let's just say that would be the case, and I was indeed person, which I made it very clear in there that I wasn't person. Again, they ignored that. So they reneged on a contract because they should know that there's a complete distinction between man and person, okay? So, the rules must apply to all parties. Thus, that day on the 31st of December, they were claiming they had the right to enforce a contract called COVID Act. I was there as a man saying, even if that contract exists and I had signed into it, which I hadn't, then I had all the rules that were involved in that COVID contract. I had the same capacity to enforce the rules of the contract, let's say. But the fact that I came in there as a man and identified myself as a man, I had even more enforceable capacity in relation to witnessing, asking the questions I asked, and filming on the highway. So straight away then, Verdonschot and Banks and the duty inspector at the back of that, who she said was aware of what was going on, were claiming that they had more capacity in the enforcement of rules in relation to the COVID Act. On that alone, on that claim alone, to claim they had more power of authority than I, meant that even their attempt at enforcing that contract was unenforceable for the simple reason they were claiming to have rules above the rules in the contract. So if we put that to Alistair, whom Hilton had made clear in a letter, a threatening letter to Alistair, ending in the important bits, which was stating that she'd kicked him off the contract with COVID because she'd informed HMRC that he was no longer allowed to have the loans. So in the one hand, she's kicked him off the contract, which means the contract isn't binding on Alistair because Hilton had told him so in writing. But even so, had that not happened, Hilton, Gavin, Verdonschot, and the duty inspector on the day were claiming that they had more rules than Alistair did. And thus, according to the mutuality of contract, I'll say it again, the requirement that all rules must apply to all parties to a contract for the contract to be enforceable wasn't being carried out there by the police and by Hilton, which is the environment aspect of the council executive. Capita, because she operates for Blackburn and Darwin and the Ribble Valley. Okay? So all those three organisations, Ribble Valley, Blackburn and Darwin and Hyndburn, are abusing a claimed contract that, as we've said, wasn't actually enforced with Alistair because she'd kicked it off. And when it came to me, they were claiming all the rules in the world that they didn't have. There was no contract between us at all. No contract between I and the police in order for them to claim more rules than I. Okay? So that's fraud. That's fraud by Verdonschot, fraud by Gavin, and it's fraud by the duty inspector who was behind the scenes and, as Verdonschot made clear, knew what was going on. Also, Verdonschot failed to provide the warrant card and laughed and said she found what I was saying highly amusing. Okay? So, remember, the duty inspector of that day was also, he backed that because I got arrested after that. So there are the persons that day doing business acting contrary to the idea of mutuality of contract. So that's a good example again, in order to just show you in relation to contract how the rules of any contract are applicable to all parties in that contract, okay? And anybody doing contrary, the contract's void immediately, so any enforcement that they continue to do was null and void. Fraud is involved between Verdonschot, Gavin and the duty inspector, okay? Because I'm not really holding Banks totally culpable in the sense he took command, but he is culpable as a man for assaulting me, robbing me of my property, and then kidnapping me and putting me in a cage, and then putting me in another cage and whisking me off again as a kidnap to Greenbank, okay? Followed again by breach of contract from Sergeant Plummer and the duty inspector Clark, who was in the back room and wouldn't come out. He wouldn't come out. He wouldn't come out. I demanded to see him at all points. He wouldn't come out. So, again, we're talking fraud. And Plummer's also guilty of totally ignoring the facts as I gave him, which was that I was a man and not person. Yeah? A criminal conversion of my Christian name by incorporating a surname. And he depicted it as a surname because he put the Young in capital letters, or uppercase. Even though I'd made it very clear, I didn't consent to anything that had gone on that afternoon, I didn't consent to being fingerprinted, etc. But he used the threat of force, okay, on many an occasion. So again, you've got a plumber in the Green Bank and you've got Duty Inspector Clark also inside Green Bank, who are guilty of fraud and claiming to have rules above any rules that I were entitled to in a contract they were claiming to be enforcing, i.e. they were law enforcement. So can you see how serious this is in relation to these persons, or men, women doing business as persons that day? It is really serious. And this carries for all this nonsense that's going on under COVID-19 Act. And not only that, in the way that they're enforcing law as well, litter police, etc. This is all a breach of contracts here, agreements that we have with our state, okay, which they're basing on the birth certificate with the surname, okay. Now, if you're on your birth certificate even, the simple fact is, they claim it to be a surname, but in reality, what it actually is it's a patronymic. And it's an inheritance from your father. It's a gift. If you use your family name, what it actually is in law is a patronymic. It's there making the decision or presumption that it's a surname. Again, there's no mutuality of contract here. Void. Everything they're doing is unlawful. Everything they're doing is illegal. Not just unlawful, it's actually illegal. So you don't have to take them into common law just to prove that what they've done is illegal and void. It's all void. And then you can sue. We can sue these people as individuals. Yeah? Because if you're going to sue the state, we're paying for it as taxpayers. So you want to be suing these people as individuals, okay? So that's another point of interest, a note in relation to contract, okay? And the rules in any contract or agreement have to apply to all parties within that contract. No party is allowed to have unfair advantage of partially applied rules under any legal contract. Okay, I'll say that again. No party within an agreement is allowed to have unfair advantage of partially applied rules under any legal contract. All right, so that's another real dynamite point in relation to how we start to understand what's actually going on here and how these Johnny-come-latelys are doing everything wrong. They're doing everything illegal and they're certainly doing everything unlawful. Now, we need to understand the term uni, okay? So the definition of uni is one or single, okay? So we go to Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, unilateral. Okay, so we're using the term uni and lateral, which is side. So we've got one-sided, ex parte, having relation to only one of two or more persons or things. Okay, so that's important that you understand that definition of uni and then lateral, one-sided. Okay, which is what is going on when these in these enforcements of this nonsense, okay? Again, so this is important. Right, so now we'll use the term unilateral, but we'll use it in the sense of a unilateral mistake, okay? So that form of mistake where only one party is mistaken. In this case, the police, in my case for the 31st of December, the police, Louise Hilton, were making a mistake. Do you get what I'm saying there? Now, it's a because what they're doing is misrepresenting the contract. So that's misrepresentation of the contract as well. So we've got fraud, misrepresentation, okay? They're not disclosing the facts and they're claiming to have more rules in this contract than you have. Now, this is how the deception's working. in this entire legal system. It's also the same in the courts. When I went for that hearing, court of record, the judge acted in this manner. He acted as though he had more rules than he actually had, but more importantly, more rules to operate than I had. Okay? Very important that you start to grasp this. Yeah? The claimants have more rules in the contract than they do. They're not disclosing the fact that they're keeping you in person, although the judge in question on that day was very clear. Okay? Very, very clear indeed. You know, so it's been a very interesting exercise, this, what's happened since the 31st of December. Especially so given that at this time now, they are changing everything in relation to the courts as well. They are really trying to shift everything onto the internet, you know. They don't want you to be able to use the post as a jurisdiction in relation to communications with all concerned in relation to court cases, okay? Because the postal service acts as your witness that you have served documents, you've served information, yeah? This is why they want off the postal service. It's really important that you get this and not play along and do everything by email. It's not what you think it is for ease. It's taking away a very important jurisdiction, i.e. the postal service, as your witness, okay? And evidence that you've served, evidence that you've presented information. And of course, as I've said before, we are now in March and still the courts have not presented me with any paperwork. None whatsoever. The only paperwork involved in this nonsense was the garbage given to me by Sergeant Plummer and Duty Inspector Clark at Greenbank. That's the only paperwork I've received. Nothing else. They've tried to get us to completely and utterly act only by emails. I've created an email account that's no reply. Okay, like they do. You know, all these operations, click no reply. So I've created an email account that's no reply. So I've responded by your email to their last request, but they have to respond to me via post to the office of the Constructive Trust, Mr. Sean Young. Okay, my relationship to that trust is that I have a interest in it. Cool? You saying what I'm saying? There's a distinction. I'm making a distinction between me, flesh and blood man, as derived from the Word of God, and the person. Even though we wad off that into a constructive trust that Sergeant Plummer invented on that day, a criminal conversion and a creation of a trust, that they've now created that paper. And that's the only paperwork I've had. So there's no claim before any court here. Yet the court gave me the court of record hearing, so there is shenanigans going on. So can you see? So the courts are actually now showing us as well that they are colluding with this game, okay? Even though we haven't got any paperwork, the fact that I got that court of record, the fact that I had a district judge, is evidence that the courts are colluding in this nonsense, okay? So that again is extremely important that you grasp. So if a contractual mistake has been made, then the relief may be granted to the party that's been abused. And so you can have relief from that contract or any nonsense that came of it. In my case, arrest, assault, robbery, kidnap, false imprisonment, and to stand there, have fingerprints taken, searched again, and to witness the criminal conversion of my name into a constructive trust with a surname. Because it's not even a mistake, that were deliberate, you know, but we're just using the terms that can be used in courts, in essence. And so relief can be given by a court on that basis also. So just to expand that slightly, so what you're basically saying that mistake can be given remedy if that party influenced in his decision to enter into the contract by mistake that was material to him, and the existence of the mistake was known to the other party. Vidonk knew it. Gavin knew it. Yeah. The duty inspector that we haven't got the name for on the day, who was aware of what was going on, he knew it. Plummer knew it. And Chief Inspector Clark knew it. Okay? Now, responsible for all them officers, or constables, even though they claim to be officers, they're still constables, or maybe they're not because she wouldn't give me a warrant card. Maybe Plummer wasn't because he wouldn't give me his warrant card either. And he refused to give me his warrant card and said that's on his oath. So that's interesting too. Now, I know I was in the Green Bank, but even so, I shouldn't have been there. So when I asked for his oath, it should have been forthcoming. Now, the liable party there at the top of all this is the Chief Constable, because he signs the warrant card, which shows that the person carrying it has the authority and holds the office of constable. All right? This is how it works. Liability, people. Liability. Man, male, female. That's who they are. They're liable as individuals, okay? It's no good suing the cop shop. Don't sue the police. You sue the individual. Doing business as person. And forcing you into a contract that they knew they were forcing into it. Not giving you all the facts. And claiming more rules in that contract than you have. They're all guilty of that. It's fraud. It's fraud. Okay? So again, Fraud Act 2006, specifically look at Section 2, Section 3. Okay? Very important you start to get these things in your grammar, so you've got it to hand and you understand when it's happening to you, no matter who you're talking to in the state system. No matter who. Registrar, police, council, government, anybody. Anybody that's in the civil service, you need to be well aware of what the Fraud Act is, because then you'll see when it's being moved against you, when fraud's being set against you, okay? Okay, so now we're going to get back to, we did go off a little bit off track there, but it's important grammar, and it is concurrent with what it is we're trying to achieve here. Now, we're going back to the titles, okay? Because there's a remedy. Whether you've got birth certificate or even your entry of birth, it still, as we said, they're both two sides of the same mechanic in Roman law, the private and the public. So your entry of birth keeps you in the private, still on person, and when they add the surname or incorporate the surname, that puts you in the public. Okay, it's very important that you get these concepts. Now, the solution is what's called the secret deed. We'll go to the solution in relation to title, person, okay? I know we've gone off track a little bit there, but it is important grammar. The concepts in that work in sync with this that I'm going to give you now, which is the secret deed. It says a distinction must be made as to which side, public or private, the name belongs. As we've said, the entry of birth, it puts you in the private. With the surname incorporated, puts you in the public. So that's an assumption made based on the birth certificate. So they're all assuming you're on the birth certificate from the get-go, okay? That's what they're doing, always. It says if no secret deed is found to counter the registration for a sole proprietor name, will always be presumed falsely to be acting in the capacity of the public sole proprietor business and be subject to the regulations. Because the idea is any corporation has to be regulated. Okay, that is the basic premise of corporations, entities, businesses, etc. Okay, so they have to be regulated. So it's only businesses that have to be regulated, not man, be you male or female. That is not regulated. The only regulations in relation to man is the Ten Commandments, as we've discussed many times, okay? It doesn't matter whether you love Bible or you're not. We're not dealing with religion when we talk. When I'm speaking about the Bible, I'm not speaking about religion. You really need to understand that, okay? I'm not religious, okay? Jesus didn't say worship him. He said follow him, follow his lead. It's a big difference. Religion is all about worship. All of them. Every single religion is about worship. Okay? All of them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have priesthoods, congregations, because what are you doing? You're worshipping. Every time you go into a mosque or a synagogue or a church or a temple, you've gone there to worship. Now, I'm not going to make a play on all the other religions because I live on England, I'm a man, and I study the doctrine, which breaks down to law. That's what doctrine means. It's law. It defines as law. So I'm not ever speaking of religion when I'm talking about the Bible. I'm speaking specifically about law. And the only law, or what you might say regulation, in relation to man, is the Ten Commandments. Okay? It's important that we understand this. It doesn't matter whether you accept the Ten Commandments, but if you're trying to operate in the correct manner and invoke law as your jurisdiction, then you have to understand that what you're invoking there is the Ten Commandments. Okay? So it's important that you grasp it in this metal and not think that I'm religious or I'm trying to get you all to be worshipping. No, it's not about worship. It's about follow. Be is what Jesus is saying. Don't worship. Be as he was, what he did. Okay? Which is basically, all he actually said was, and I'm going to use an expletive here because it does simplify it. When he took the path, basically what he was saying was fuck off to everything that was false. That's all he was doing. And that's what he's telling you to do. Follow that lead. Okay? You don't have to use those expletives, but you're saying no when you find something that's false or incorrect. Alright? So, it says the regulations were only made for public businesses by the government. So that's public, so that's surname. This is why it's important you understand that there is a difference between private and public, because everything that they're doing is dealing with you as in the public, on surname, on birth certificate, okay? By government, and then in brackets says corporate entities. And of course, governments are operating statutes, are they not? So all and everything government puts out, or acts and statutes, only relating to corporations, to business, to entities, i.e. birth certificate entities, okay, the straw man, as it were. Counter deeds, which is the secret deed, because you're going to counter the assumed deed that they're all assuming you are operating on. It says, counter deeds correct the record by rebutting the presumptions that the name you are using is a public business, when you are in fact a living being. You're a living man, male, female, okay? The problem could have been avoided altogether. It says, the problem could have been avoided altogether if one had used their given Christian name. Now note, on the 31st of December, I used only my given Christian name. That's the only name I used throughout the whole affair. Alright? And I'll say it again, the problem could have been avoided altogether if one had used only the given Christian name when in their private capacity out in the public. So I was out in the public, as it were, on the highway, but I made it very clear that I was a man. And in only giving my Christian name, very clear that if they were going to assume I were on person, which was a false assumption, then I was in the private. You see, that voids all actions carried out by Verdonschot, Banks, the duty inspector behind as the event took place, Louise Hilton for the council, Sergeant Plummer, and Duty Inspector Clark, because he was in the background not coming out, and the Chief Inspector, Andy Rhodes. Now, it's a bit deeper for this for Andy Rhodes because they were given these facts in 2017 by me, okay? And also the courts were too. So the judge who sat the hearing, the court of record on the 21st of January, the courts had also been given the facts that if I were operating in person or on person, it was in the private. So everything that judge did also is void on the 21st of January because the courts had already been given the facts in 2017, as was Andy Rhodes. Okay, so that in as both drags both of them in as liable as well. Can you see how this just snowballs when you start to grasp this grammar? It's so important. So they were presuming I was doing business in the public, even though I made it clear that I was a man. But more importantly, even if they were presuming I was on person, I made it clear that I was in the private. All right, big difference. It says, without a counter deed by rebuttal, the doctrine of merger does not apply, so the presumption stands as accepted. Now, so this is why if you've got a birth certificate, etc., it's this secret deed, the counter deed, that needs to be addressed by you guys. In my case, it doesn't apply because I made it clear I was a man, but also, even if they were assuming I were on person, it was in the private, and they were assuming I was in the public, and they played the whole event out as if it was in the public. They're liable for that, okay? As man, male, female, all of them. All right. The officer, also them in the station that were searching me. There were two more of them. There were a guy who drove me in the kidnap to Green Bank. And that was a different guy again. Okay. All involved on that day, liable. Because just because they were taking command is meaningless. We are each responsible for our own behaviour as a man, male, female. It's a fact. That is biblical law. Okay. We're responsible spiritually. And then that pans down here too. It says men were meant to be free. Okay? So as a man, you're born free in the image of God. And businesses are to be regulated. All right? Can you see what I'm saying here? Because businesses are fictions and therefore must be known to be held responsible for their actions. So basically, that's to protect you and us in business and trade so that I'm not selling you a poisonous concoction. Are you with me? The vaccine is a poisonous concoction, right? That's regulated. By whom? Government. Who's actually making you have this? Or making you feel like you have to have it? The government, the NHS, the nurses, the doctors, the police, because they're all mental health workers. They're all involved in ensuring that you take poison. And they're operating as businesses. Now are you starting to see the immensity of this game? And they're playing this game because you're ignorant of these facts, these freedoms, these rights. Are you starting to really understand this now? Good, because it's so important that we start applying this. Okay, it's so important we apply. It's a house of cards, this game. You know, Alice in Wonderland is so true. It's a house of cards. And this is the way you blow that house of cards down. So you can't just sit on your backside and wait for everybody else to do it. This is something you're going to have to take upon yourself to do. Not only for yourself, but for your offspring. For your mother, your father. Are you with me? It's so important. And then this house of cards comes crumbling down. Okay. So, if we go to the entry of birth, which is puts in the private, it says private is belonging to some particular person. So again, as we've said, even your entry of birth, you're still on person, but you're in the private. Now, so a counter deed, it says a counter deed is an act made by you, and it's a secret deed, a record, okay, a recording, or a change that is executed before a notary, which is a witness, or under a private seal. Now, private seal you can have an embosser made where you're putting on your seal. Now, if you go back to Middle Ages, they all had the seal on the ring into the wax. That's your seal, okay? That's your flesh and blood mark. Today, in legal, it's signature. If you want to get away from signature, you can autograph. That's autonomy. You're a flesh and blood man, autonomous. Signature is cursive, remember. It's the language of the dead. You joined up writing anywhere and anything, it's cursive. You are presenting yourself as dead, lost at sea. Yeah? So again, it really is about understanding the language, how to write, how not to write. What is the English language and what isn't the English language. Uppercase words are not English language. There is a communication in Roman law if it's hyphenated between each word. But when you look at any of your legal documents, whether it's council tax, anything, your name is uppercase. Or if your Christian name isn't, the surname is. Because that then incorporates your Christian name. Okay? Do you get me? So it incorporates your private person into the public. Are you seeing what I'm saying there? So the other way to do a private seal is a thumbprint in red ink. That's fresh and blood. That's you. Okay? So that's another way. But an improved version of that is to have an embosser made with your seal. And you stamp every document that you send. Okay? It says a counter deed destroys or invalidates, voids, or alters a public deed. And your registration documents, the certificates, are a deed in the public. The birth certificate. The entry of birth is a deed in the private. So I'll read that again so you understand it, so you don't have to rewind. The private is belonging to some particular person, the entry of birth, or the Christian name without surname. Okay, that's the private. And it's all about incorporating the surname to put that title into the public. Yeah? You don't even want to be that, you want to be a man with an interest, arm's length and distinct interest in the person. All right? So important you get this. So it says a counter deed. A counter deed is an act, because you have to do this, and it's a secret deed. It's a recording or record or change that is executed before a notary, which is a witness, or under your private seal. So we still get documents witnessed and then add on our private seal. Okay? It says a counter deed destroys, invalidates, voids, or alters a public deed. So you have to create this counter deed and send it into the registry office, because it then counters all presumptions and assumptions that you are in the public. Okay? Now, there's a bit more to know as well. Now, the difference between deeds and agreements or contracts. Agreement is a contract, as we've discussed in the earlier part of this. So there's a huge difference between a deed and a contract. What is a deed? A deed is a special type of binding promise or commitment to carry out an act. A deed can pass legal or equitable interest in property or other rights. It can create a binding obligations on a person and affirm an agreement that passes legal or equitable interest in property or other rights. Okay? So a deed is powerful. Very, very powerful indeed. Okay? Which is why when you buy a house, old school, it's the deed that's the important document, not the mortgage. It's the deed, because that's the transfer of property. Yeah, the deed. A mortgage is something completely different, but we're not going into that now. But this is how important the deed is. So this is why they're saying you have to create a counter deed against the titles that have been created when you register your offspring. All right? So what you're actually going to do is put into perspective what that deed is, not what's assumed. Okay? A deed must be in writing. It must be signed, witnessed by at least one person who is not party to the deed, so has no interest in the deed. Expressed to be a deed, so you have to make sure it states that it's a deed. Not a notice. yeah, or anything like that. It's got to expressly say it's a deed in writing, and it's to be delivered to the other party. And it's to be supported by evidence that the parties intended to execute the document as a deed and to be legally bound by it. Okay. So right, what is the differences between a deed or an agreement? Again, it's just expanding this. It says generally all contracts are agreements. However, all agreements are not necessarily legally enforceable contracts. The main differences between a deed and an agreement are that there is no requirement for consideration in order for a deed to be binding. That means there's no payment need to be made, no deposit. So there's no money exchange involved in this format. All right? Whereas if you're doing contracts with people, it's generally money's involved, isn't there? Yeah. A deed is binding on a party when it has been signed, sealed, and delivered to the other party. I'll give you that again. A deed is binding on a party when it has been signed, sealed, and delivered to the other party. So you sign, seal it, and deliver it to the other party. And as soon as it's been delivered to the other party, it's binding. Even if the other party has not yet executed the document. Right? So there's no room there with a deed to pretend they didn't get it or anything. It doesn't matter. Once it's delivered and it's been signed and sealed as in accordance with how you create a deed, the moment it's delivered to the other party, it's binding. All right? Very important. It says the deed has been signed and sealed, but what about the element of delivery? Delivery can be inferred from any fact or circumstance, including words or conduct. Merely executing the document in the form of a deed does not itself imply delivery unless it appears that execution was intended to constitute delivery. Okay? Just to add, the term execution in this concept is another word for signing, signed. Okay? Okay, just grasp that. So if you think about it now, once registration has been accomplished, you're either getting the entry of birth or the birth certificate, and that's a printout as a certified copy. So they never give you the original. They only ever give you certified copies, okay? Because that's all they can do. Now, let's consider where mistakes have been made in relation to our use of those certificates. So, for instance, bank account. You've opened a bank account, and it's all on the assumption that you're operating in the public. You're doing business. That's a mistake that needs to be remedied with the counter deed. Your driving license is also the same. You get a license issued and it puts you then in the public. You're doing business, you're going to be regulated. Okay? And then if you're getting benefits from the government, etc., etc., they want to see your birth certificate. Same again with your passport. All right? So all these documents that you're receiving from the state are presumed you doing business in the public. And thus, all the regulations are then apply to those licenses. So these are issues that you have to counter with a counter deed. Are you starting to understand the premise of this? So these are the primary things that need to be undone so that you're putting the facts in the correct manner. Yeah? Now, this is where it gets a bit interesting as well, because you don't want to throw away your birth certificate. If you throw away your birth certificate, you're not going to get anything, are you? You're not going to get a bank account, you're not going to get a license, you won't be able to take a car or do anything like that. You're not going to get a passport, so you're not going to be able to travel. So you don't want to remove these titles off yourself. Now, I've had this with a lot of people who have chased the... People thought off the Freeman stuff, which is garbage, okay, which is what I used to tell John, and I don't think he's dead anyway. I think he just got his passport out. this is the trap they got you into with the Freeman stuff. Because they were all, the overriding thesis was that you don't want these instruments. Well, these instruments are what ties you into the systems that you live within. What you want to be doing is putting the correct format into these, against the deed, so that the presumptions and assumptions that you're in the public are removed. Okay, so that's the basic idea with this concept of the secret deed, okay, the counter deed, as it were. Now, this is not something that I have attempted to do, because the way I'm operating this is I'm presenting myself as a flesh and blood man, okay, which is a lot more difficult. But from this nonsense from the 31st of December, this is what it's forced me into starting to understand. So what I'm doing here, because a lot of people have followed the lead in relation to trying to get the entry birth and not having success, I don't want you to think it's the end of the world. So what I'm trying to do now is give you some more grammar so that you can move in this direction and counteract the mistakes that have been made in relation to that. Are you with me? So this is not something that I've done. I may do it in the future, but the basic idea is that to counter deed these for your licenses, your birth certificates, etc., your registry office, you're going to have to get a copy again of either your entry birth, your birth certificate, and you're going to have to put the counter deed that you create onto the back of it and then issue it or deliver it to license, registry, passport, etc., etc. Okay, to invoke the power of this counter deed. Do you get what I'm saying? So this isn't something I've done. It's not something I need to do at this point, but I will do this just so we can understand the mechanic of it. Also, any of you out there that do try this and move this way, please keep me fully informed with the process that you're using, and I'll give you whatever advice I can, because you'll be surprised in all this event, the people that have come forward and connected with me now. You know, there's some smart cookies out there, and I so appreciate everything that you've done for me and continue to do as we work together. I can't get that across enough, but I'm so grateful for the help that I'm getting. You know, I really do appreciate it, and I just want to offer you a big thank you, and may our relationships continue. So it's not something I've done, and if you want to move in this direction, please keep me fully informed. So as this group moves and builds, we can expand it and offer it up in a more simpler term for people that really are not going to understand these concepts, this grammar, this language at all. So, you know, because this needs to be moved so that we can all do this, as many people as we want, and then the house of cards will fall. Okay, so keep that in mind. You know, if you're going to do this, keep me fully informed, and then we're all working together, and that way we can move forward rather quickly, and that would be acceptable and good. So in essence, when you counter these licenses, documents, etc., you're putting yourself on the private side of the ledger. Now that is in relation to the birth certificate, which puts you in the public. The entry of birth is already in the private, all right? So it might not be something that needs to be done if you do have the entry of birth with just the Christian name. You may not need to do all this, okay? And it is important that we understand that. So I've put this out quickly because it wasn't something that I was playing with or doing, but because so many are moving with what I've put out in relation to the two different documents and coming up with problems, this is the remedy that bypasses all the nonsense that they're playing against you, but more importantly, it will take you completely out of the public on person. Because what you're going to be doing here, you don't want to be obligated to all the statutes and regulations that the birth certificate in the public is subject to. you want to be off that. Because you still want all the privileges that come, the interest in the person. You want that so that you can carry on to operate. Are you with me? So you're negating the rules against you because you're coming off the public and into the private. Are you seeing what I'm saying there? So if you've got rid of your birth certificate, you're in trouble. You're in some big trouble because you need these things. But what you have to do is counter them. And as we've now said in this video, with a counter deed. So I hope that helps. Email me. Feel free to carry on emailing me. It's good that we're all communicating and we are moving forward. Now, as a caveat, I'm just going to say, in relation to these councils collecting money off people for breaches of what they say is COVID, a contract that they're claiming more rules on that you've got is void. Not disclosing all the facts of the contract, again, void, right? I'll just give you an example. A shop or cafe is being fined by the council for two breaches. In a conversation had by the solicitor operating for the council, who works for the council, right? He actually works for the council. This is how they're setting up the fees, the fines. They fined a £2,000 fine and a £1,000 fine. Now get this. The solicitor who works for the council is charging you £1,400 in fees at the point that they're at, on his own bat, even though he works for the council. You. Yeah? So he's working for your operation and claiming fees on the back of it. But get this. They're charging £5,500 of what they call investigation fees. £5,500 they're classing as investigation fees. What have they done? Turned up, blah blah blah, and buggered off. Is that what they call investigation? An investigation in all this game is grass. People grassing. So are these grasses getting money? Okay, £5,000 investigation fees. Come on, people. What are they playing at here? And they need to be brought to book pretty bloody quick, is in my opinion. This is outrageous, you know. So, I hope that helps. I may further this as we move forward. And as I said, I might actually attempt this. Not attempt it. I might actually do this. Just so that we actually do know the ins and outs. But if there are you guys out there that want to do it, please keep me informed so that we can do... Because I'm so busy. Excuse me. I'm so busy. It would be great if other people would try this and we work in a loop. It would just mean I don't have to do it myself personally. So with that, I will say, till the next time.